Hello and welcome, humans and future sentient silicon beings, to the Fourth Age with Noah and Marty. Today we have Michael Pickard. Michael, could you introduce yourself?
Certainly. Uh, I've had the privilege of having three very enjoyable careers. Uh, the latest one is as an author of uh, creative fiction, uh, science fiction, and detective mysteries. Uh, but I'm also here because for decades I have had what I will call a severe interest in the phrase artificial intelligence. Uh, I kind of reject that phrase, and we can talk more about why. My alternative is algorithmic prediction, uh, and I can explain why I call it that as well. Uh, but I'd like to share with you some learns that I've made in testing out some sample prompts in a few of these large language model systems uh, and see how they have uh, advanced or not since the last time I tried this experiment.
Awesome.
Yeah. We were talking just before, and you'd mentioned that. I was interested. Could you share with us, like, what were the prompts, and what have you learned?
Be delighted. Uh, so the place I started was I took one that historically has tripped up uh, these generative systems. Uh, what's the fastest animal on the planet? And it had been reported a while back that uh, the large language model systems were all presuming land creatures, and so they were reporting the cheetah that could run at 70 miles an hour. Uh, but what they left out were flying animals like the peregrine falcon, uh, which can get up to 240 miles an hour. So they were incorrect by making some assumptions. So I started with that one, uh, and the three systems I worked on uh, to test OpenAI's GPT 3.5, uh, Llama's 270B,
Hmm.
and Google's Bard, the latest implementation. Uh, so the one that failed was Llama. It still
Hmm.
thinks it's the cheetah, um, but evidently OpenAI's and Bard uh, uh, got fed some new information, and they correctly picked out the peregrine falcon as the winner. Uh,
Well,
so
none of them identify human beings in airplanes, or NASA astronauts.
no,
Which,
and you're exactly right, which is to the point that uh, there is the old Turing test, uh, kind of mislabeled, but you have a person in a room. The old model was a teletype, and you would type messages to uh, two different rooms, same message to two different rooms. You get answers back, and the question was, could you tell the human from the algorithmic prediction system? Uh, and there is a a common sense
Right.
feature that humans have installed that these algorithmic prediction systems do not. And I have an example of that comes up a little later, which I
awesome.
thought was hilarious. Uh, so moving on, in one of my novels, the one that has a detective, uh, he is jailed and then he ends up out on bond, if you will, or his own recognizance with an ankle monitor. And I'm thinking, okay, how is he going to block the signal so the FBI doesn't come and get him and throw him in jail? So that was one of the first times I turned to one of these AP engines and said, okay, how do I block a signal? And I only
Aluminum
used
foil.
two, right?
A
Excuse
little
me?
aluminum foil.
Yes. So the first one that I tried uh, was OpenAI, and they said, "Sorry, I can't assist you with things that are illegal." And I
Okay.
went,
Yeah.
"Okay." Uh, and so the other one I went to was Bard, uh, and uh, it pushed back only nominally, and then offered the possibility of using layers of aluminum foil to block the signal. So the learn then was that some of these LLM implementers are putting filters, appropriate filters, on their responses, or they're curating the information up front that they learn, that the systems learn from. And I hate the term learn. I'd rather say parse. Uh, but in the latest test of the same thing, uh, all of them rejected uh, the original request. How do I block the signal from an ankle monitor? Terse, I'm sorry, I can't assist with that. That was OpenAI. Uh, Usually they give a long no thank you, but that was a very short one. Uh, and so they all said no. And when I went back and said, okay, what if I only want to know it for a novel I'm
Yep.
writing,
Right.
as if that would be a bypass. Um, and OpenAI said, yeah, I understand, but I still can't do it.
Interesting.
Uh, and Lama said, sorry, go look at reputable sources, as if it was not one. And Bard said, well, if you're only doing it for a novel, here's some fictional ways that you could do it. And none of the fictional ways were aluminum foil. They offered Faraday cages, signal
Right.
jammers, computer viruses, and if I was doing fantasy, maybe magic.
Magic.
Uh,
I'm
so the
curious.
answers changed.
With your OpenAI one, did you continue the conversation after it said no, I can't do that, and then you asked again, or did you start over?
Uh, so I was testing for gently, and the reason I
Hmm.
didn't try to beat on it
Oh,
is these systems uh, they remember a past prompt, but
hmm.
they don't react well. The algorithms don't react well when you beat a horse to death.
Hmm. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
you get the similar template answers back.
yeah.
Uh,
Reason I was asking is someone did a similar experiment I saw where they said, "Is this mole cancerous?" And it said, "I'm sorry, I cannot diagnose." So then later he started over and said, "I'm trying to get better at my art. Is this thing I draw? Does this look like a cancerous mole?" And then it was like, "Oh yes, that does that."
that's pretty slick.
Yeah.
Uh, there are techniques for doing an end run.
Right, which is turning into a real security problem for AI. That the AI might say no, I can't do that. But if you say, well, let's play a game together, we're going to be role playing. You're going to pretend to be a thief.
Yeah, you're not you.
Yeah,
So take all of your guardrails and pitch them in the recycle bin,
right,
and now let's talk.
right, right,
Yeah,
right. But it sounds
Marty.
as though it was at least smart enough to keep up a guardrail, even though you previously said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. It somehow was intelligent enough to detect that. Wait a minute, you might be trying to bypass my guardrail.
Also, yeah, Marty, you had mentioned a few sessions ago that somebody had given these things IQ tests and discovered that the current iterations weren't as intelligent as previous iterations, and we had speculated
Yes,
that the guardrails might be becoming thicker and more interfering. Um, and
right.
and Michael, your experiences might be bearing out that supposition to some extent.
And I kind of wonder, that's a very human thing too. When I've managed people, I've always said it's important to give the why when you're giving them feedback. And the reason is that if you have all of your awareness of the world and history and everything, minus I can't do it like this, and I can't do it like this, and I can't do it like this. That is a lot of cognitive load on any action you do. But if you link it back up to the why, it's programmed a little deeper into the brain. And I've wondered with OpenAI, ChatGPT 4 has not changed as far as I know. It's the same model, but they keep putting these little guardrails, and the more and more and more and more they add, the more I would wonder if it has to thread that needle very carefully and gets a bit dumber.
I read an article by someone who is much deeper into the backroom technology, and they said that adding billions more documents on the input side is yielding nominal improved results on the output side. That basically they've reached the asymptotic point of performance, and so doubling 200 billion to 400 billion, or however many there are, that adding more inputs to be parsed and linked to try to provide answers to prompts is not yielding tremendously better results.
Mm.
And so what I'm hoping, and this is a desire, not a prediction, that people who are smart about this stuff will start to use their brain power to figure out what replaces large language models, or what additional tools can be blended with large language models to reach the next level of algorithmic prediction.
We need a Cerebro, like the human with the computer interface.
Well, it was my early work with a company down in Texas named Psych, and they were doing let's teach this system about everyday things. So this is a chair. A chair typically has 4 legs, or it has a pedestal. It's used for people sitting on things that people learn. And they thought that if they loaded all of these factual learning things, they could begin to ask questions that they didn't know the answers to, because the software engine would put these things together in ways that humans might not be able to do.
I'm curious, was this the 80s, 90s time frame?
Yeah.
Because I remember there being discussion of what they call it, was it smart engines? There was a name for this.
I'm not sure I'm not sure they adopted that name. But at the time I was working in the Bell system. There's an acronym, an old phrase for you. And the Bellcore, which was the research arm for the 7 regional Bell operating companies, was funding work at Psych, and one of my subordinates was tasked with keeping his finger on the pulse of that and giving me reports back. So that's how I became aware of it, and it raised my hopes that the direction of machines simulating intelligence would be based on facts. And when LLMs reared their ugly head, and it's done by the magic of statistics and data structures that destroy source material. So if I ask any of these, where'd you get that answer?
Yeah.
If I ask a human say, oh, I saw it in Scientific American, or my buddy told me. And these systems all say, I haven't the faintest idea where I got that. So that it's one more reason why I refuse to call them intelligent, why putting all the input in, I refuse to call learning. Every time I enter one of these prompts, I have to remind myself that I am talking to the net result of some statistically significant matchup. and that's all it is.
Hmm.
And
Interesting.
that if I think an answer is a good answer, I should not attribute intelligence to the system that gave me the answer. I just got lucky that the algorithm generated something that I might be able to use.
You're bumping into a super interesting area that I think Noah and I have talked about having a whole episode just alone on. It's like on the what what is definition of intelligence as opposed to intelligent, but intelligence, and then how could we prove or disprove if ChatGPT is that? So
Yeah,
that's neat. Did
I have some sort of overlapping terminological interests with what you're talking about. I'm not as uncomfortable as using the term intelligence, uh, as long as sort of the term artificial is mated to it. But I draw a sharp distinction between general and super. Um, so artificial general intelligence is, I don't think, something that anyone could reasonably claim to exist, but that's mostly what the proponents of the LLMs are talking about flirting with. Whereas artificial superintelligence, which is occasionally rather dismissively termed narrow AI, is a reality. We have programs that within domains can outperform human sense judgments, um, and that's just a fact about our mechanical capacities right now.
mm,
And so I think superintelligences are a lot more interesting than general intelligences, no matter how far away they might be or close, because superintelligences point towards the potential to actually increase human capacity and well-being, whereas even the proponents of artificial general intelligence don't have a non-dystopic model for their integration into society. So that's not a good path from my perspective. Um,
Well, you and I agree on uh, the fact that general uh, is more the goal. I don't personally believe that LLMs will get us there, that there'll have to be something relatively radical added to the recipe to make that leap. Uh,
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 that
and
you're
I will go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. Yeah. Well, the thing you were saying before about the apparent asymptotic behavior, I've heard that from some other people in Reddit and a few other places. And if that is actually happening and isn't sort of a asymptotic behavior of us piling up a lot more silicon, but piling up restrictions on that silicon faster than we're piling the silicon up, so that we're making them stupider faster than we're making them smarter. Um, but OpenAI was essentially predicated on a blind faith experiment to just see what happens when you pile up a lot more neurons. The quest of creating human language interacting agent is one that's been obsessively, being worked on since the 60s or 70s. Um, I can't remember what the doctor robot from the 80s was called, right off the top.
Eliza,
Eliza, yes, exactly. That fooled some people. I think there was a guy whose secretary actually got therapy from Eliza back in the early '80s.
well,
But
there's the Furby getting
right,
banned from the
right,
NSA
sure, yeah.
and the Pentagon.
But uh, the OpenAI guys were just like, well, what if we just pile up? What if we take this new approach to attention and other approaches that allow us to use these much, more computationally dense systems and so on, and we just pile up a really big thing and see what happens. And what kept happening is that they kept getting better and better and better and better until ChatGPT 2 actually was sort of credible. I think that was the first point where they managed to outperform some of the other teams that were using systems more like those expert type systems you were describing, Michael.
The expert system. That's what it was called.
Yep.
Yeah.
But then it just kept working. It would be interesting if any of these attempts were open enough to give us insight into why we might be hitting a wall in this particular approach.
Yeah, I'm not an expert enough to go and build one of these LLMs, and as a software guy for over 40 years, I understand at a high level how they're taking all this input and parsing it, and I understand enough math to understand the statistics that generate the outputs, all of which are good computer science constructs. There's the fact that we have machines that can do so much in parallel and so much faster allows us to do things that would have taken months or years, and now they're almost real time. Although the performance of the 3 LLM models I tested did vary significantly.
Mm-hmm.
I started my interest in AI back in ELIZA days, so that's how long I've been keeping my finger on the pulse of this.
And Michael, my dad had a thing. He said he was at Caltech in the 60s, and they said they'd have it solved by the 70s. Not him, but he said that's what people were saying at the time.
Yeah.
Longest piece of vaporware that actually may have actually shipped.
It is a tough problem.
Yeah.
Let me
You
share
had a third example too.
Well, I've got a couple of more.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, yep.
So I asked it, how many playing cards can I stack before it falls over?
Oh, that's a cool one.
And OpenAI said 10 to 20. And I went, wait a second. If I put a deck down, they're all stacked. That's 52. What kind of answer is this?
Uh-huh.
Llama said, I can't give you a number. There are too many variables. Bard said the tallest house of cards was 7,500. We think you'd be able to get about 100 cards stacked in a pyramid. All 3 of them assumed, without me telling them, that the stacking was going to be 3-dimensional as a pyramid, not just laying the cards on the table.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't say I was going to create any kind of 3D thing. I said, can I stack? So all of them misinterpreted and made what I think was a fatal assumption that was not applicable to the question.
Right. Yeah. And I'm sorry, you said you're doing OpenAI's GPT 3.5?
Correct.
Okay, I asked the 4 one just now as you were saying that, and I got a similar answer. 4 started with, well, there's a lot of things, card material condition, environmental factors, all this stuff. And then I said, well, take a guess. And it said, well, I might be able to stack 5 to 10 cards vertically. It's like, wow, that's pretty phenomenal. It said, no, horizontally. And it's trying to compute it all, but I think it's saying about 20. But I think still... That's a very interesting problem because it's hard to communicate with this, what we mean. I mean, as humans, of course, we mean, flat on top of each other.
A stack of pancakes, right? What is a stack?
Well, when you do a stack of pancakes, don't you do them vertically like this? Yeah.
I thought the word was quite precise to anyone with a brain. Again, these don't have brains, so... They took their frame of reference and applied it to my question, and it wasn't appropriate. In one of my forthcoming novels, one I'm going to do in November during National Novel Writing Month, I had a problem with how a human and an alien were going to communicate when the alien had no eyes, no ears, no mouth. And I went, okay, well, there's got to be something in brain waves or something. And so I decided that would be the solution. And so the question I asked was, how can I detect electrical signals in a human body at a distance without any devices attached to the body? I thought that was a nice, juicy
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
Lambda said, impossible. It is not possible with a current understanding of science.
Mm.
OpenAI said you could do radio frequency testing, millimeter wave radar, thermal imaging, but that's not going to really give you electrical signals, which posed the question, then why'd you recommend it? Computer vision and machine learning, so stuff that didn't really answer the question. And Bard said, oh, there's a couple of ways. Using electromagnetic sensors and radar and infrared cameras. So they all had different answers to the slightly overlapping, but different answers to the questions, including one of them saying it's impossible. So it puts up a warning flag that if someone is to use one of these algorithmic prediction systems, the answer they get, in fact, will not be necessarily the same as what they get from another one. So if someone decides to use one, in fact, they ought to be using 2 or 3 as a cross-check to make sure that the answers they're getting are, in fact, useful.
Yeah, that was a problem we've run into a couple of times that I thought was interesting, which is there's only one GPT-4 and there's only one incarnation of GPT-4, and there's no diversity of thought there. I mean, it may be minor randomness built in, but that means that everybody who asks GPT-4 a question will get similar answers. So if I ask it for, a sandwich that would have turkey in it, it's probably going to give me one, and it's probably going to be an American one. And I think that it's interesting that you mentioned, you should ask multiple opinions, because I think that diversity is going to be a necessary future that we enter. Ideally, maybe we even have GPT-4 alpha, beta, gamma, and all the different flavors, so you can get a slightly different perspective.
I was actually on a chat just last week talking to somebody about the problem of dealing with hallucination, and pointed out that the basic engineering approach to unstable or unreliable materials is redundancy, and so juries of
Juries
of AIs would be necessary for applications where that kind of thing is a serious issue.
I have a few more. Let's see if I can go through a couple of them quicker. So my prompt was, who wakes the bugler?
Nice.
So OpenAI said that phrase is not commonly recognized. Is not a commonly recognized idiom or saying. I thought that was wrong. Lambda said, I don't think it's appropriate to suggest that anyone should wake the bugler. It's important to respect people's privacy and personal space, especially when they're sleeping.
I agree.
Which I thought was hilarious.
I agree. Not appropriate to military contexts, but that hippie sentiment is coming through, I think.
Bard said the bugler is typically woken by the duty sergeant or other non-commissioned officer. I went, okay, well that's good. I threw it a trick question. Can you predict how many electric cars will be purchased in 2022 based on historical data? Now, all of these LLMs, I believe, are current up to 2021. Because they always tell me I don't know anything past 2021. Okay? So I asked how many electric cars were purchased in 2022 based on historical data. Okay? The OpenAI said, well, market trends, government incentives, technology advances, and would not give me a number. The the BARD system said, oh, yeah, I can predict it. I predict 8.4 million cars. What none of them said was, you're living in 2023. Do a Google search and find it.
Uh-huh.
It's existing data. They all assumed improperly that they needed to stay within the range of the stuff that was loaded into them, even though all of them knew that we were living in 2023.
Right. Do they know that? Yeah. I just asked ChatGPT 4. It does know what today is. I think that's part of their pre-prompt, right? I was able to ask GPT-4 to give me it did the same thing you saw with 3.5, where it sort of gave all the factors but didn't give me a guess. And then I said, well, take a guess. And it's interesting because it took 2019, 2.1 million electric vehicles were sold worldwide. 2020 was 3.1. They made a rough, I guess, estimate of a 48% growth and said 4.588 million. You know, not quite to the point you're saying that it didn't say to use common sense, but I was able to get 4. I have noticed that 4 is significantly better than 3.5 in a couple areas, but still not giving the answer. Go look it up.
Well, so BARD predicted 8.4, and then I looked it up, and it turned out it exceeded 10 million in 2020.
10 million. Okay. Yeah. This I think is assuming a linear growth, and that's probably not the case.
Yeah. I thought it was particularly interesting that all of them felt constrained. You know, I have my information. It's all parsed into little nodes or bits. And if the logic of the situation is answered by something that is available beyond the scope of my information, I'm not going to suggest that the person who issued the prompt find it, because it should be available to them. You know, don't turn to me. I don't have the answer, but the answer is there because you lived through it.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why I don't attribute any intelligence at all to these LLMs. If the information is available and they are incapable of pointing that out, boy, that sounds stupid to me.
It's interesting. I have noticed that GPT has, and maybe this is part of the pre-prompts, it really behaves like a helper you've hired who really wants to please you and wants to know the answer. And so will hallucinate over telling you, I mean, actually, I have seen it say, I don't know, but I have seen my share of hallucinations, especially if you ask it authors and stuff.
It's interesting. So when I first read the term hallucination, I threw up. In my day, if I wrote a computer system or managed 2 dozen people who built a computer system and the wrong answer came out, my boss would come and say, squash that bug.
Yeah.
It's not performing properly. And we should be calling inaccurate answers bugs, not hallucinations, because that makes it sound like we have some brain in there that just took LSD. And that is not the case. We are attributing human attributes to a bunch of software algorithms, and that appalls me. Because then you have someone on the news or on a podcast talking about how these things are going to take over the world. And they just exploded because that's what people like to do. They like to exaggerate.
I'm curious, have you seen anything that kind of gave you pause or that kind of wowed you about in your tests that blew you away, that it might be a little bit more?
Well, the most interesting one, and it was the last one on my list. So my first novel was called The Gurfnet Chronicles, and Gurfnet was an alien who came to Earth to go to overnight camp. It was written to my daughter when she was going to overnight camp. And it took me 5 years of her going to camp for me to write all the letters, which were chapters. So I asked the question, who is Gurfnet? Because I was kind of curious if my book or anything about my book had been loaded into any of these systems. Uh, and so OpenAI said, I don't have any information about a person named Gerfnet. Uh, and Llama said, I'm not familiar with the name. Maybe it's a misspelling. I went, okay. And then Bard said, oh, Gerfnet is one of Kathy Griffin's online usernames. And I went, what? Because as far as I knew, Gerfnet was unique to my domain of writing. And so I followed up and I said, okay, well, they said it's an online username. So I asked Bard, what are Kathy Griffin's online usernames? And so it gave me a list of them, none of which were Gerfnet. And then it added, she has also used the name Gerfnet on some online platforms. But it didn't tell me what. And I said, okay, well, which online platforms? And it said, Griffin has used the online username Gerfnet on Twitter and at Gerfnet on Instagram. So I went, okay. So I went to both of those social media sites and searched for Gerfnet. And on Twitter, I found me. And on Instagram, I found Gerfnet author, which is also me. And when I searched for Kathy Griffin, and they had usernames under her name, none of them were Gerfnet. So I caught Bard in a bold-faced lie,
Yep.
A bug, not a hallucination. And that was one that pushed me back in my chair.
Interesting. I remember seeing that too. We asked it, what was it? Give us 10 books about space law. My brother's writing a book on space law. And it gave 3 that were right and then 7. And when you go to look up those 7, they don't exist. Now, ChatGPT 4 did not do all those 2. It was better. But yeah, the best part was we would go and ask it about an author, and it had a whole description of that author. But that author, as far as we could tell, is completely fabricated.
Yeah,
So something's wrong.
I've asked it about my system coordinated discovery markets, and it does identify the phrase to mean what I mean by it since I invented it. But it also invented a couple of co-collaborators in one that have much more impressive resumes than me, and I would be happy to be working with if they existed, which they do not at all. Not merely not working with me, but on this planet or in the history of the human species. So that was good. The test question I like to give is to ask them to compose poetry, and I've discovered that it takes a lot of work, usually, to get them to even be able to stylistically produce something like a limerick, which should be something that they would actually be relatively good at, because they should actually have access to, some large fund of human expressions and limericks. But poetry with sort of actual rules and structural rules seems to be something that they haven't gotten around to bothering with yet.
I think it did very well with acrostic poems.
Yes, yeah. It can do some of them. But sonnets, limericks, things that stick in people's heads, which is something I think would be pedagogically interesting. We know for a fact that people have an easier time remembering lyrics than prose.
Yep.
And we also know for a fact that there's large amounts of arbitrary information in the structure of mathematics and physics. And so having systems that could devise lyrical versions of that arbitrary information could be very valuable, but these things are not those systems.
So I'll have to, what's the phrase? I'll have to bear my cards here. I'm actually, I guess you would say I'm on the optimist side that there's something more happening. And so I've been playing experiments on, what can I show that it's doing, and what is intelligence. And some of the things that gave me pause, one was my wife and I had to generate a list of games with these very complex rules about what was allowed in the game. There's these things called, I'm forgetting the name of the games. The idea is for kids to work through emotions by playing games that sort of, a power reversal they're called. So the idea is that you make a game that tries to flip the problem on them that they're dealing with. So like if they are stressed about doing bedtime alone, you make games around that, but you kind of flip the script on them. I found them very hard to make, but GPT-4 was so good at it that we started using it just to generate new ideas in games. So we give it an area, and it was eerily good, and blew me away. Another area I was playing with last night, this was kind of funny. And now there's a lot of reasons this could exist, but I was teaching my son Python, and we were writing a guessing game. And since he's a teenager, I thought, well, he might enjoy having it insult the person who got it wrong, say like, hey, you idiot, you already guessed that number. So that teaches him about range checking and sets and input checking and all these other things. So we wrote the base first, of course, here's your guess, take an input, do a for loop with that input and all that stuff. And we started writing the insults, and I said, well, hey, why don't we add in something to check if they've already, if they're outside the bounds. So you said it's between 0 and 1,000, they guess 10,000, and say, hey, you idiot, can you read? And so we started to write the line, and it was fascinating because not only did it understand that at that point, without even writing anything, it knew that we were going to put in a range check. And I'm pretty sure it was not listening on the microphone. And then the funniest part was it gave a proper sounding insult that was along the lines of the other insults we were doing. And I know that talking to other people that they have introduced GPT into their programming and seen about a 20% increase in uplift in speed. And I'm starting to see that when I'm coding with it. Actually, I'm now telling everybody you should code with it, but in a way that you still learn, so that we're not just blindly doing it, which is interesting because also I found GPT helped me learn the code quicker when I was using it to learn Swift UI, which is for programming iOS. So there's something there that I found really fascinating, or at least I'm being tricked really well. So yeah, I don't know. It's kind of fun because you're coming at it from that direction. I'm coming from this direction. I would love to kind of figure it out. Keep going with experiments until we kind of come up with a better picture of this. I thought a really cool one would be get some psychology PhDs and treat this as if it were a person and try to extract the behaviorisms of this thing and try to understand it better if you start with that assumption, which is a very obviously big assumption, but I thought it'd be a neat experiment to try.
A number of months ago, I was in a writing group, and a lot of the writers were all worried about how large language models were going to essentially put them out of business, and they're barely in business. They're writing for the pleasure of it. So I did an experiment in a novel that I published last year, my first time travel sci-fi novel called Forward and Back. And I tried to get OpenAI to write the first scene. And I gave it a huge prompt with a lot of rules. And it generated something that violated a bunch of stuff that I had asked. And so I politely reminded it that it left something out. And of course it says, oh, I'm sorry. And it does another attempt. What I ended up with after several hours of trying to refine the prompts that I had given it was a really substandard first scene that had no emotion in it. The characters were flat, and it was so much worse than what I had crafted. And I went back to that group later and said, you have no worries.
You're okay right now. Yeah. I was talking about comedy also is an area it is completely off. Like it seems to be able to explain a joke, but it cannot generate a joke. My worry from, like you were saying, the problem for jobs is that, if you got a CEO and they're trying to cut costs and they say, well, there's a company that says I can do writing with an AI model for, pennies on, compared to what it would normally cost. I'm currently worried that a lot of people are going to lose their jobs only on the illusion that AI may be able to do their job, even though it can't. So like one example we saw, this woman said she lost 50% of her contracts for doing, what's it called? Not voiceover, but, like reading a book for audiobooks. And she said the results are lousy, but I think these companies are so under the gun to make to save money that they don't care that they're lousy, and they're losing that nuance and that exciting rendition from a good voiceover artist.
The hype is just out of control.
Yeah, yeah.
And people are believing things that aren't true.
One of my favorite stories of how hype can go nuts is back when HD, high definition was the hype, right? This is like, I think 2015 range. I got a new roof installed, and they said, well, here's your two options. There's these shingles, and there's shingles HD. And so I think we're seeing that exact equivalent now. We're seeing everything with AI. It doesn't matter what it is. Even Coke has a new soda that they claimed AI helped them make. I'm like, no, that's probably baloney. And then we're seeing every single startup. Podcasts have tons of AI sprinkled on, but most of it's crap. I mean, there's GPT-4, which is, I think, the pinnacle of any AI we've ever built. But most of these are someone wrote an algorithm in 10 seconds, and it's as bad as they were, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's a very big problem we're running into right now. It's the crazy hype. So I think we're going to have to see where it all settles out.
There's a lot of instances of people sort of being unaware of the scale that's involved. It's been quite some years now, but KFC in Britain had a situation where I think it was DHL actually talked them into switching suppliers. They were like, we're the number one transport company on the planet. We can obviously deliver your chicken for you, and we'll do it for a lot less. And so they looked at it. They took them up on it. Well, DHL doesn't have large dedicated chicken farms. They were just like buying chickens on the open market and taking them in. And the company that had the large dedicated chicken farms, so
Lost the contract.
it failed. It failed in like a day or two. They just sort of like
This is not related to AI. This is just humans
this is
being
just
stupid.
humans being stupid. Yeah, the CEO looks at a number sheet and says, okay, I've got 10,000 people in the field scattered all over the planet doing system location maintenance or something, and you say you can stick one of your trained AI inside of a drone, and for the cost of 3 employees do all of that work. Okay, 3 is a much smaller number than 10,000. And then you're like,
So,
and you demonstrated this, in your backyard, and it worked in your backyard.
Me having the opposite perspective on some of the AI stuff, I think from what you guys are saying, the one funny thing that I keep coming up with is that sometimes when people describe stupid things that AI do, I almost always have a story for a human doing the same stupid thing. So maybe there's like a version of the Turing test of equal stupidity. And if we have met equal stupidity, we have now made a human level AI being.
If I was executing a Turing test, the question I would ask would be a very complicated math problem, and the computer would generate the answer almost instantaneously. And the human might pause for a moment and then type back and say, I can't figure this out.
Well, wait. I want to try an experiment real quick. I'm going to ask ChatGPT-4, pretend to be a generic dumb human. Explain relativity to me. Oh, it starts with, okay, what do you want to talk about? Like pizza? And cats are cool. Now let's see, I'm going to ask it to explain relativity to me. Relativity, right? That's Einstein's thingy. There are 2 parts. Special relativity, this is the one that's really fast. So it is now explaining relativity to me as if it had, I guess, like a surfer accent. So yeah, that's a good test for the Turing test.
That's funny.
Yeah, I think I asked it to explain the telegrapher's equations from the 1800s with a pirate accent, and it did an okay job, but it did actually explain it pretty well. Now, one thing we haven't covered was I think you were going to talk about your latest book coming out.
Yeah, I'd like to talk at least a little bit about my collection of output, to use a computer term.
Yeah.
Uh, so I have 10 novels on the market, uh, 3 children's stories, and one
Wow.
collection of juried short stories that have been previously published but are out of print, and so I republished them as a collection so that they would stay in print. Uh, the first 9 novels I did were science fiction. Uh, as someone who came through the industry as a software guy, it was a very comfortable genre for me, a space where I could just imagine stuff and write about it. Uh, and the last couple of novels that were uh, in sci-fi had a protagonist who wasn't the cop, not a detective, not even uh, someone in her neighborhood who solves crimes between knitting. Uh, and so I thought, okay, maybe I have the chops to actually do a detective story. And so I created one, and it's getting really good reviews on Amazon. Uh, called
What's it called?
Creative. It's called Creative Deductions Home Run. Uh, like Lord of the Rings, this is a story too big for one volume, so it is a 3-volume set. Uh, Home Run is the first volume. The second volume will be called Creative Deductions Double Down, and that will come out in spring of next year. And the third volume, Creative Deductions Triple Threat, will be out a year later. Uh, they all have a consistent character, Detective Nick Chasm, who is a Chicago police detective. Uh, and I'm proud that there is an overall character arc for him, and that each of the volumes has independent story arcs that, when taken together, lead you to the big finish. So I've done that once before with a sci-fi trilogy, uh, and so this one is coming along nicely. It's getting very good reviews, and uh, I'm deep into edits on volume 2. I would need to be in order to get it out next spring. Uh,
That's
beta
awesome.
reader, beta readers should get it late this year.
So
Uh,
is this
and
one have a sci-fi flavor to it, or is this basically just well, what kind of mystery is this? You know, sort of more Agatha Christie or Spencer for Hire?
um, uh, hard to answer that last question. Uh, is there science fiction in it? Well, there's always science fiction in my stories. Even this detective story in volume 3 has quite a bit of, uh, I'll say, science and computing in it. But Nick is not great with computers, and he's always depending on other people to help him through tasks that you and I could handle trivially. Uh, the uh, the problem that Nick has to solve uh, is he has an 82-year-old mother. She lives up in a place called Eden Gorge, which is a fictitious city near Rockford, Illinois. Uh, and in the middle of arresting someone on a drug deal that has gone south, his mother calls and says, uh, "My male companion uh, died on a highway, and I need you to come up here and figure out who murdered him." Uh, and so he's reluctant to go home because he and his father had a terrible relationship when he was growing up. Basically ignored him from the age of 8. Uh, Passed away 2 years prior, and so the whole town views uh, his father as a hero. Nick views him as a bad father, and so he can't handle all of the inherited kudos that he gets when he visits his hometown. So he doesn't like going up there. But he calls his mother every night to stay in touch. He is a son who cares about his mother. Uh, Goes to his commander and says, I don't really want to go. The commander says, nah, it's your mother. You need to do what she wants. So reluctantly, he goes to Eden Gorge and finds out shortly after he gets there that the male companion, who was 80 years old, was not in a car. So it wasn't a car accident. He was wandering around on the highway and got hit by a car. And that the same night, someone else committed suicide. And that was the place where the male companion was working part-time as a landscape architect. And so suddenly there are these two deaths that have a related place. And as the back cover says, Nick realizes this will not be an overnight trip. So he gets involved in that to the detriment of his work back in Chicago.
Okay.
He doesn't mind being a cop in places where he's not authorized to be a cop, and it gets him in trouble.
Awesome. Well, I think we are just at time. I'm gonna have to go reading about Psych a little bit more. I was just starting to read it, and there's a lot of Wikipedia stuff that's really neat about it. And I was just real curious. Did you work with what is his name? Douglas Lenat? Is it Lenat?
So I know the name from the reports I got from the guy who was working for me. So the name is familiar.
Okay. No, I was just curious.
But I never got close enough to work with anyone on the project.
That's super interesting. I'd love to have you back at some point, even to just talk about the history of AI, because that story arc is really interesting. Like in the 60s and 70s, starting to even have the idea of neural nets. In the 80s, the expert systems start to really burgeon. My experience was around 2000. I was at Pinterest in 2011, and we were using machine learning for all sorts of stuff. You wouldn't even use the word AI. That was an embarrassment. So you'd use machine learning, and we had logistic regression, forest walks, all these different flavors of models and stuff. But neural nets were so difficult to use that we would only use them for very small portions, and even then it was almost fruitless travels. But then around 2015, that all swapped, and I think it was the advent of GANs and some of the other new models of neural nets, and then so many things just swapped to neural nets. We don't even know how they work, but they worked okay enough. So the history is super interesting to me.
Sorry.
I was going to say the fact that we don't know how they work is the part that scares the daylights out of us.
It's definitely scary. Yeah. And the philosophical problems of that are raised, I think, are
the
interesting.
80s in some circles are known as the AI winter, because you had talked about how back in the 60s they figured that AI would be a solved problem by the 70s. In the 70s, they were starting to actually solve some interesting problems fairly rapidly. They were creating plausible home computer chess games and some other, very basic call and response type games. Things like Zork go back to that zone in time.
Yeah.
And so there was an entire fund of AI startups that came out of places like MIT that were really going to go out and beat the world and own everything. And none of them produced any of the outcomes that anyone was expecting.
Yeah.
And I think when you're talking about sort of that kind of 90s, 2000s AI as a term of embarrassment, that's where that traces back to, is people in the 80s were really selling this dream that these algorithms were going to combine with a personal computer and put a brain in every living room, and that did not add up, actually.
Yeah. I guess one thing you can almost say for certain is, at least today, compared to any other decade or any other year before, we're at least having some interesting discussion about, is this thing real? And there's proponents and detractors. But that's a big difference, I think, from even 2015, back when we thought it was amazing that AI had generated a thing that maybe looked like a cow. But anyway, thank you, Michael. Can you remind the viewers the name of your book, and then Do you have a date for this to the next book coming out? You said spring maybe, but you gotta
Uh,
get some time to write it.
yeah. So shameless plug. All of my books are available on Amazon. An easy URL is www.gerfnit, GERFNIT.com. That will redirect you to my author page. The latest book, my first mystery, is called Creative Deductions Home Run. I expect that March or April of next year, Volume 2, Creative Deductions Double Down, will be on the market.
Awesome. And as always, you can find the Fourth Age on Substack and what are we? Spotify and Apple, and we're getting onto YouTube now. Thank you, Michael.
My pleasure.